So on the count of 3, I want everyone to laugh. I don't care how fake it is. That does not bother me, but I want everyone to do it. Now, if someone doesn't do it, we'll do it over again, class, because guess what? By the time you figure out who I am, I'll be out of town. Don't really care, okay? So on the count of 3, one quick laugh. 1, 2, 3. You guys can go ahead and sit down. Or Sherry, I highly recommend maybe you need a relationship class next year. We'll deal with that. Okay, so let me answer the first question that should be on your mind. What in the world is a corporate relationship expert? Well, other than being one of the most important relationships that a company can have to ensure its success not only in the present but in the future, and a term I totally made up, just so you know, the best way for me to explain it would be to take you back in time. When I entered the workforce, I was what you call a good worker. How many of you can kind of picture a good worker? You know what it means to be a good worker? In case you don't know what it means to be a good worker, here's what it means. I actually showed up on time with a good attitude, and, brace yourself, I did my job. I thought everyone was a good worker. No idea. After a period of time, my boss came and gave me what I call the pitch. The pitch goes like this. Tony, you're doing a great job. We'd like to talk to you about your career path. Here's what we're thinking. We're going to give you a few people to supervise. All you have to do is to get them to work just like you're working, and everything will go well. Don't worry. It'll be easy. I call it the pitch because here's what they don't tell you. They don't say, oh, and by the way, there's 3 other people who really want to be supervisors, but they're not ready. So they're going to be mad, but not at us. They're going to be mad at you because we chose you over them. So you're going to have to figure out how to deal with their negative attitude, all while learning how to supervise them. Not to mention, you know, Tony, you're younger than a lot of people around here. You know, youth has a really negative stigma in the workplace. There are people who aren't going to respect you, not because of what you've done, but simply because of your age. And you're going to have to learn to win them over, all while learning how to appreciate and value the experience that they brought to the workplace, while learning how to supervise them. All right, you know, so I normally don't talk about this. This is kind of one of those things that my closest inner circle knows about me. So most people don't know about this about me, but I'll share this with you. So I'm black. I know that's shocking for some of you, and some of you don't see color, but that's a different workshop. So, but here's what you have to understand. Do you know that there are people who never in their life have seen a person of color in a position of authority before? Just like there are people who've never seen a female, a person with a disability, someone with an accent, someone with a different orientation, ever in their life. So guess what, Tony? People won't just be difficult, some will be downright adversarial. And you're going to have to be the bigger person and win them over, all while learning how to supervise them. And then no one ever says, you see that guy over there? He's crazy, right? Because there's someone crazy in every workplace, right? Raise your hand if you know the crazy person. Don't point at each other, but if you're sitting next to them, just blink a couple times, just so it's between us two, okay? Listen, if you don't know who the crazy person is, it's because it's you. But there's one in every workplace. So here's what happened. Immediately, conflict rose, morale dropped, and we struggled with productivity. Now, I knew I had a lot to learn about leadership, and I remembered that. But then later, some other pieces started to fall into place, because about a year or so later, I was preparing to go on a business trip to visit a client I'd never worked with before. And my manager pulled me aside and said, I need to prepare you for this trip because something happened a few years ago that you need to know. And I'm thinking, a few years ago? He said, yeah. An incident happened. It's a paper mill, and it's in a small town in Maine. Now, this paper mill is the driving economic force in this town. But something happened with some of the maintenance workers where they realized they weren't being paid fairly. And they didn't have, the right benefits. And so they banded together and they decided to strike. Well, eventually, the entire paper mill decided to have a strike. And if you don't know much about paper manufacturing, it's a 24-hour-a-day process. Very short amount of time, the paper mill couldn't afford it. Because, you think an average paper mill, when it's not running, is losing about $250 of profit per minute. And so very quickly, everyone got desperate, and so what the paper mill did is they put an ad in the paper. We're looking for paper machine operators. No experience necessary. We'll train you starting at $20 an hour. Now imagine that in a small town where your primary businesses are mom and pop shops. It got crazy because people took the ad. And all of a sudden in the paper mill, you started to see fights. You saw arguments. I don't mean just arguments, I mean fights, death threats. Productivity suffered. And it wasn't just within the mill. The entire town was affected by it. Friends became enemies. There were family members that no longer talked to each other. Churches split and businesses fell apart. And I remembered that. A couple of years later, I was working for another company, and we had a change in leadership. And with that change in leadership came some changes in our core values. And I was working in nonprofit, so people really took their values and the mission very seriously. And that change in values, that change in mission, hit people at their core. And I saw people function in ways that I thought, man, that's so irrational. That's not like you, but they were doing it. And arguments started to happen, and literally fights broke out at times, and people resisted change. And then I realized that whether it was me becoming a supervisor, or whether it was workers wanting fair wages and benefits, or whether it was a change in mission and culture, that the common denominator was change. And in each of those situations, conflict rose, morale dropped, and they struggled with productivity. And it turns out, it's pretty normal. Whether you're talking about quality improvement or customer service, implementing new technologies, or even just changing culture, more often than not, change is not only an uphill battle, it falls apart. Conventional thinking is that, well, the problem is we don't plan for this well enough. We don't prepare. And so many people started really focusing on change management. And this idea that, what we really need to do is if we build the vision and start planning this change and we do it properly, that we can really cement this thing and make some amazing parts happen. But here's reality. Change doesn't fall apart on an organizational level. You and I make up the organization. And you and I either willingly change, resist change, or don't change. And so more and more I started to think about how much the people side of business affects everything. And that was the idea of becoming a corporate relationship expert. It's how we interact that drives the company, because it's our relationship and it's our attitudes that are the culture. And so I started thinking more about, well, how do we change? Because I had some opportunities to work with people when they're at their best and when they're at their worst. And so my wife was working on a project for her company, and we started thinking, well, how do we show a model to help people understand what it really means to change? And we read this quote, and it just sparked a thought. And we thought, you know what? Here's what change really is. Change is trying to get, I'm going to skip that, sorry, for time's sake. Oh, we're going to skip a lot of stuff. Change is trying to get from one trapeze to another. Have you ever seen anybody on the trapeze? We're in Vegas. Most of you have probably seen someone on a trapeze, right? And this slide's going to come up in a few minutes. I just realized I updated the slides. I think we had a little issue. If you're going to go from one trapeze to another, there's something you have to do. You've got to let go of that first trapeze, right? And then at some point, you've got to grab onto the other trapeze. But there's a problem. Most trapezes are not set up where you can grab both at the same time. There's space in between. A number of years ago, I was coaching my youngest son's baseball team. And we had a really good season, and so the manager said, let's have a party. We're going to take the kids out. And so we went to one of these places where they have like the trampoline rooms. They do trampoline dodgeball, trampoline basketball. And there was this really cool climbing wall. And everyone's like trying to do the climbing wall. And most are not making it. Some are doing okay. And my son's like, we got to do the climbing wall. So he goes up and he gets about halfway up. And he's like, Dad, try it. And now the whole time I'm watching how people climb. I'm listening to all the input that the people on the side are giving him. I kind of figured out a path. And so I got on and I thought, okay, I know to use my legs. I kind of figured this out. And I started going. And I'm making way more progress than I ever thought. And I got about 2/3 of the way up, and my son's like, come on, Dad, you got this. And I looked down, and I had this realization. I'm afraid of heights. And I just looked down 25 feet, and I'm holding on to this little thing, and I'm like, yo. But he's like, come on, Dad, you can do it. And now I'm like, my son, right? So focus, I keep climbing. And I got to the top. I'm like, everyone's like, great job. I'm like, cool. So then I'm like, okay, so I'm looking for the thing to start going back down. Like, no, just let go. I'm like, all right. You see her with the rope? She's about 120 pounds. I'm not. That ain't gonna happen. But in my mind, I'm like, I can't. It took me longer to let go than it took to climb up the wall. Truth of the matter is, if I had both ends of the rope, I would rappel down. I could do that. But that unknown of what was in the middle, that limbo, makes it really hard to let go. And that, my friends, is the challenge for you and I, is letting go. Because when we go through change, we have to be able to let go. And here's the thing. We often think we're letting go of the past. That would be easy. What we have to let go is far different than the past. We have to let go of this thing called a comfort zone. See, our comfort zone is this area that we build in which we can reach a state of kind of equilibrium. And we can get things done with a fairly minimal amount of stress. That's what it's built for. And the cool things about comfort zone is once you really build it, it's easy to stay in it. It's actually meant to keep you in. So when we talk about comfort zone now, that's a little too nondescript. Let's make this more specific. Comfort zones have some very specific parts to them. We got a formatting issue. Beliefs. Your current belief set is part of your comfort zone. Emotions. Your habits. Your relationships. And your circumstances. All of those are part of your comfort zone. And yet, we often only think of our circumstances when we think of our comfort zone. And here's the thing. How many of you have ever heard of a motivational speaker before? Or something, right? They'll all tell you, you got to get out of your comfort zone, right? Here's the thing. Comfort zones aren't a bad thing at all. We need comfort zones. You can't be under stress all the time. But here's the problem. Comfort zones expire. They grow obsolete. And if we hold on to something that's obsolete, it begins to hurt us. It keeps us from growing. And so here's reality. Although today we're talking about change at work, we're also talking about change in life. Because you're not going to make it through life if you can't change. And life comes at you in such specific, strange ways that you have to be able to adapt, right? And you have to be able to bounce back. And you have to have a certain amount of resilience. And it comes from how we view change. So today I'm going to talk about change. So I want to start off with our emotions, right? Because our emotions really are a function of how we view change. And we have to go from viewing change as being our foe and making it our friend. So a number of years ago, I had a client say, hey, Tony, we want you to do this workshop on stress. I said, okay, that's really not my area of expertise. But they're like, well, here's the thing, Tony. Number one, we know you're an engineer from background, and we know that you will go ahead and do the research. But we also know that our people just love you, and they want you to do it. I said, okay, great. So I started talking to all my friends who did it, and they showed me this. It's called the stressor scale. The stressor scale is actually what psychologists use when you go in to see just how much stress are you under. But it's even more than that. Insurance companies use this when they're trying to figure out how much of a risk are you. And what they do is they say, well, okay, in the past year, what events have happened in your life? And they all have a numerical value, as many of you are looking through them. And if you add up that numerical value and it's under 150, then you're in a pretty good situation. But if it's between 150 and 300, there's a significant concern that there could be a health-related incident in your life in the next 2 years, about 50%. And if it's over 300, then we're really concerned. So I started looking at this. Okay, let's see. Death of a spouse, 100. Divorce, 73. Now, some people argue why they're in that order. Okay, that's a different workshop, all right? That's out of my lane, baby. You guys play with that on your own, all right? But I kept looking. Marital separation, jail term, death of a close family member. And then I realized something. When people measure how much stress you're under, what they're really measuring is how much change has happened in your life. And they put a numerical value to it. And the crazy thing about it is, not all of the change is bad, right? Retirement, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Addition to the family, business readjustment. Some of the things you can't tell, change in financial status. But even the positive changes have an effect on your life. And they build up, and they have a cumulative effect, actually. Oh, this is the old one. Okay. What's interesting, I thought about this for a bit. Because I looked at it from my life, and I said, okay, what's happened in the last 9 months? Well, last summer, I was selected to be a certified speaking professional. It's actually a big thing. And so, I'm sorry, I'm trying to catch up to where everything is on here. So I got to walk in front of most of my peers, and only about 15% of professional speakers ever reach this status. So it was a big deal. So it was outstanding personal achievement, 28. Turned out, though, at that same point in time, because my son had just graduated high school, my wife and I decided to move into the city. That city being New York. There's no New York stressor scale on here, by the way, but let's just say there's a number to that as well, okay? So that means all of a sudden we had a change in residence, which is 20, as well as there's another one, change in living conditions, 25. A month and a half later, my youngest son went off to school. Son or daughter leaving home, 29. There's no number for son or daughter coming back, by the way. Just thought I would throw that out there. In the middle of that, we decided from a business standpoint, it's time for me to be not just a speaker, but I get so many requests to actually consult with organizations to change their culture and to do other things. So I had already added on a training component, but now, we're a full-out consulting firm, which means I had to start hiring people, which I had been avoiding. And so now, business readjustment, 39, plus change in work responsibilities, which is another 20. And then an interesting thing happened. Right after Labor Day, my wife calls me and tells me that her mother was just put in hospice and given 2 to 6 months to live. Change in a family member's health, 44. She made it 3 weeks and then passed. Death of a close family member. And because of our relationship, because we were very close, 16 years ago, she'd asked me to actually eulogize her at her memorial. So you can imagine all that was going on. Oh, by the way, did I mention that 90% of my clients are federal government? Did you know the government's been shut down for over 30 days? You could just say there's a number on there for that. I added up. You know what that number adds up to? 343. But it explains a lot. My wife and I have just these moments where just emotions would just go out of control. She used to talk to her mom twice a day, every morning, every evening. It explains that while we were at the funeral, or at the memorial, while we were planning it, there was so much stress. People were like, well, why aren't we having a mass? Why aren't we having a priest do this? Why are you being selected to do it? And her brother, at one point, was so volatile, I thought we were actually going to end up in a fight. I'm like, this is so not normal. That's exactly it. It's so not normal. Emotions were never meant to be a gauge for reality. And yet, too often, we rely on them. We use them as though this is what reality is. We go with our gut. We have these feelings. And that's not what our emotions were designed for. And let me tell you, when under stress, your emotions will betray you. And they'll betray not only you, they'll betray the people around you. And you'll have to deal with that because there are people that when they're under stress, they're going to take it out on you and not realize it has nothing to do with you. I'd just become a brand new supervisor. And I was having my first meeting. I was set. I was like, I learned from what everyone else is doing. I'm not doing those things. We're going to get through this. We're running. The meeting is going great. And then all of a sudden, I mentioned one minor change because it was requested that our expense reports were going to be turned in 5 days earlier. So instead of on the 22nd, we needed to turn them in on the 17th, just so that accounting would have more time to deal with it. Minor, right? So I said that, and out of the corner I hear, what? I can't believe this. Blah, 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 blah. And time slowed down. Serious, it was like Matrix stuff, you know what I mean? It was and just for it felt like eternity. It's probably about 15 seconds, but I'm like, is this really happening? And so when it was done, I kind of shook it off and was just, okay. I didn't know what to do. I'd never dealt with this before. So kind of laughed, kind of played it off. And if that's ever happened to you, don't feel bad. No one ever told you it was coming. I'm telling you, it's coming. And you live in a world right now where change is imminent. We cannot escape change. You will be dealing with people at their best and at their worst. I'm going to skip a couple slides because I know we got to do that. Okay, so just trust me for a minute. You're going to have to be able to take a hit, and I'm telling you it's coming.